Welcome to The Art of Growth. I'm Jim Zartman, and today Joel and I sit down to answer a couple questions. One that comes up on a pretty regular basis around what do you do when you are interested in growing, but the people around you aren't? Your friends, your partner, someone you're dating, however it is. So before we get to that, just real quick, you can get to all of our work through theartofgrowth.org, and you can reach us there for corporate coaching, team coaching, as well as individual coaching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and give us a ratings on iTunes. It helps people find the show. You can also get to our Instagram page at Art of Growth and our Facebook page as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this discussion that Joel and I have today. So we told you all that we would be doing some podcasts where we answer listener questions, and we have been getting some good ones. We're going to take on a couple today. Some of them are going to be more brief, and then some of them actually probably would deserve whole episodes. So real quick, we're going to kick off something. Some of you have been asking about instincts or subtypes, and we are going to do actually a lot more on that this coming year. So if you're not subscribed already, make sure you subscribe because we will be going over some of the instinct stuff, and that is really helpful. I would say that diving into that has been as helpful as learning about my type. So we're not going to dive into that right now. There is funny. There is the is this a Christian podcast?
Yeah. Is it, Jim? Is it a Christian podcast?
Well, it's funny. It's just a weird question because there was like a review where someone was just like, "This is actually like a secret Christian podcast." I'm like, it is neither secret nor Christian. Like, it's not a Christian podcast, but we've made no attempts to hide the fact that we come from the background of the Christian tradition or being pastors.
What else am I going to talk about? This is kind of like my starting point, right?
We haven't said this is our starting point. Like, this is where we come from. This is where we've come from day one. But it's not a Christian podcast. Like, definitely not everyone who's been on this podcast is of that tradition. But we don't say like, oh, by the way, this person's a Hindu and this person's a
right.
We don't do that
because that to us really is not nearly as important as sort of self-awareness about, who you are, what your type is, your growth path, your journey. I mean, these things are far more interesting in terms of transformational growth. But we haven't, most of my clients are non-church going people. Right. I think in terms of like giving some context for it, the last probably, I'd say maybe 12 to 24 months, there's been this really growth in the church world, particularly the evangelical world, with interest in the Enneagram. And that has been a surprise because prior to that, the Enneagram's been around for quite a while. Maybe beside the fact that it's been around for, some estimates are around 2,000 years. The last 40 years or so, it has been here in the U.S. And the teachers of it, the main schools the two main schools, the Institute and then the Narrative Enneagram.
Yeah, Russ Hudson,
Helen Palmer. Neither one of them are Christians.
Or they come from that tradition.
But they don't come from that tradition. They're familiar with it, but that's not their that's not their world. So
it's funny you were talking about it being at the Enneagram the International Enneagram Conference, and them. So many of the teachers talk about like, well, it's really interesting that this is taking off in the evangelical or the Christian circles at all. Isn't that so strange? It's so interesting. And they're like asking you questions.
Oh, they're asking me questions because I'm an insider to that world. They're like, what is going on? It's like, very unfamiliar to them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny and good. It's really good. I'm glad it's getting itself, the Enneagram is having the exposure it's having right now. But it does raise some questions for folks as to, those who are being introduced to it are now, some of them are being introduced to it through other Christians. And so my ambition in this thing, secretly, here's my plan. I want to convert everybody. But here's what I want to do. I want to convert everyone from, helping people to convert from their vice to their virtue, as the sort of the older language of the Enneagram. It's like, you have your, as me as a 7, I've got, gluttony is my vice and my virtue is sobriety, right? So that's my work. And for each person, that's really the journey is to grow from that compulsion to freer from that compulsion, you know?
Yeah, but there is definitely a spiritual component of it, which we will not be shying away from either, where there is a spiritual component to the Enneagram in that we see it as a tool of spiritual development, but we're not trying to promote a religion as an aspect of that.
Absolutely. I think it was David Daniels who founded, along with Helen Palmer, the Narrative Enneagram. David Daniels, brilliant psychiatrist, super involved in, research and trying to understand how people change and grow and become healthy. And, his insight was that whatever's happening within us, it's greater than simply psychology, that the root problem is spiritual. But the understanding of spirituality wasn't just a particular religion or tradition. It was this idea of that there's something more. There's something that stands between us and our growth, our transformation.
Right.
And that gets into that more of that, spiritual component. That's what we mean by spiritual, is it's things that have to do with grace, with love, with generosity, with openness. These are more of the spiritual components that are happening underneath all of that, and that we're trying to expand upon in our own lives.
Absolutely. And so if that's, whatever tradition you happen to be coming from, welcome. This is ours. We're sharing our story. We share our background, but everyone is on a journey, and we want to be a part of people's path, people's transformation, people's journey, regardless what tradition you are most familiar with. I often use the phrase, the Christian tradition is sort of my native tongue, just like English is. Like spiritually, it's the native tongue that I grew up speaking. But I like interacting with people that come from a different language and a different cultural background. And what you find is the path for a 9 is the path for a 9, regardless if they are a Buddhist, a spiritualist, a Christian, a Muslim. Like that's going to be true.
Yeah.
There's going to be a path. There's going to be that conversion from the vice to the virtue. And I think that's helpful.
Yeah. And I don't think we're not interested in, ideologies, trying to promote ideologies or I think what we're trying to do here is whatever your starting point is, that's your starting point. We're creating space here intentionally for people to express themselves in an environment that's safe for them to do so. So does that mean that when I'm listening to somebody talk that I'm agreeing and wanting to promote? The reason why we're having and interviewing these people is because we're promoting their views or their thoughts. Not so at all. No. Like I don't even want to promote my thoughts and feelings. To me, it's about this is my journey, this is my path, this is what I'm learning. Hopefully, it's helpful to all of us, and we need to create space for people to do so that's safe. And that's when we start to learn. Are there aspects, characteristics, behaviors, thought patterns that need to grow and change and transform? Yes, of course. But we have to start first with a safe environment. And so that means even bringing in your tradition of faith, your particular beliefs about things, that's part of creating that safe space for people to be who they are.
Yeah, because we want to welcome when people come in. A lot of times we don't know them very well on a panel, or they've been recommended to us, or we know them a little bit, or we know their type. But we don't know their whole story, that their whole journey. And we believe that your story is sacred space. And we want to invite your story into the space. There's no expectation of agreement. There's an expectation of grace. There's an expectation of relationship when you come in to this studio and you sit down and talk to us on a panel with other types or something. Like that's the thing that we are trying to welcome you and your story, not promoting a specific agenda other than the agenda that, hey, we all have work to do and we have things we need to work on, and we are going to do that, and we are dedicated to the growth process. So if you're dedicated to the growth process, you are on our team as far as I'm concerned.
That's well said. I think if we're to say there's a team that we're trying to promote, we're secretly trying to convert everybody to our particular religious upbringing. No, our team is the team that you just described. That's what we're interested in, is in the transformational growth. It's very practical to me. It's not so much ideological. It's not these sort of, I want you to have these beliefs, the set of beliefs. Yeah. It's, we really want you to grow and produce, fruit, produce the fruit of love, of grace, of peace in your life. And you're doing that, you're experiencing that. Well, that's a win for everyone, right? It's a win for you. It's a win for your family. It's a win for your workplace.
Yep. And I think that actually leads us nicely into a question we do want to spend some time with, because this is a really hard question, which is all these questions we get around, I'm growing and people around me aren't. What do I do when my friends don't really like the change that's happening in me? What do I do when I'm on this path and I'm trying to grow, but the people around me are not really interested in it? Immediately, I started thinking of stories of people that I talked to where, people who have come out of addiction, and they're like, all of my friends were addicts, and now I'm having to form relationships, and I don't really know how to do it with people who don't come from this background. I heard, an alcoholic who was talking about, like, I don't know how to show up at a party now, because I don't know how to talk to people without alcohol in my system. And I'm having to basically learn a whole new way of life. And like, what happens when you are an alcoholic around a lot of alcoholics and you stop being an alcoholic? What does that mean? And then another friend who was talking about how he was really, really unhealthy and really, really overweight. And he started to lose weight and get more healthy in his life. And his wife had always been really supportive and loving towards him. When he actually started getting healthier, she resented him for that. Because she's like, but this isn't basically the person I knew. This isn't the person I signed up for. And you'd think that the person that you're with would be like, oh, this is great that you're doing this. But it wasn't. And I think that happens to a lot of times. Like, people were, another husband, he's just like, my wife is dealing with a lot of depression. And I would be dealing with depression, but I'm really making sure I'm sleeping and eating and working out. I'm doing all these things, like, basically to keep myself. But my spouse is resentful of me doing all these things that they know they should be doing, or that would help them with their depression. And this question is really deep and profound, which is like, I want to change. I am growing. I am working on myself. But I'm meeting resistance where I feel like I should be celebrated, where I feel like I should be encouraged, but it's not happening.
Well, you're right. I mean, I run into this so much with my clients. Part of it that we can't answer, because this gets into coaching, is what to do that's specific to your context, right? So you mentioned, as an example, someone who's been addicted to a substance and surrounded themselves with that group, and then they try to free themselves from that. It's probably unwise for them to continue. Probably. It's not universally, but probably unwise for them to continue being surrounded by that circle, because the gravitational pull is so strong. It's so easy to fall right back into that. So if you want to continue to emerge from that, you may have to leave that group for a while. There are other groups that may be true as well, besides this illustration of or example of addiction. So let me just address that briefly, and then address other possible groups where you might stay. But in the group that you would leave and you would do so, and hopefully you do it in a humble way. So the old "it's me, not you" kind of language is really helpful, where you're not saying, I'm leaving this group because you're all a bunch of unhealthy people who aren't on the path of spiritual transformation like I am. Right. You're describing it, and you're explaining to them that for you, this is something that you need to do for yourself, and that you're doing it with all the humility that you can, with the understanding that this is what's necessary for you, and you hope that they can celebrate your growth, but you understand if they can't at this time. And that's difficult, because you still will have to probably leave that group behind and move on. But your hope is to always be available for them when they need to, when they also decide to enter that path of transformation as well.
Yeah, but I think that's the whole thing, is so many of these people, like the addiction group is a pretty extreme example of Like, I know I have to change this about myself, but my relationships are over here. The people I'm connected to are over here. My family is over here. And I do want to explore healthier relationships and meet other people. And I'm starting to do that through this process. But I think there's a lot of situations where people feel like, this is my group. Like, these are my friends. This is my community.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I'm going to expand that perhaps, but it's really hard because I am married to this person. These people are my family, and they're all looking at me like, "What? Oh, who do you think you are that you're trying to change and grow?"
Yeah. And it does get complicated. And this is, again, where coaching is really much more helpful to address that. Because if you're married to that individual, the decision is much more difficult to make. It's not a decision of real easy, like, oh, just going to divorce my spouse and move on. It may be that you have to continue, but develop maybe some accountability in your system where you're meeting regularly with other people who can help you to continue on your path of growth. Your responsibility is first and primarily to your own growth. And this is the mistake a lot of people make, is that they try to change their environment first, or they try to change their environment while they are themselves changing. And that, I think, is ass backwards, because you can only help other people grow through the journey that you've taken. I use this in my own coaching. When I'm coaching clients, there are times where I'm having a conversation with one of my clients, and I'm realizing that where I'm trying to lead them is a place I haven't been myself. And when that happens, it stirs me up in a good way. Like, it troubles me in a good way. I haven't been there. And I know that I need to go there, but I haven't been doing it myself. So then it's a good accountability for me. I go back and I think, I'm not going to be able to lead my clients if I'm not going there myself, right? So I have to continue to practice my own transformational journey. I think it's important first you recognize you have to take care of your own growth. You have to grow first. As you grow, then you become an example in some sense. You're also approaching that environment with a whole lot more humility and authenticity. And I think that's what's more helpful. Then you can help. Then you can actually maybe guide. You can make some suggestions. You can do so in a gentle way. It's always much more difficult with those who know you intimately. So oftentimes it requires an outside coach. You can't coach the people that are within your family. Right. But you can walk your own path, and through the example of your own transformation, it often does help others to start their own journey. And if it doesn't, well, that's a conversation that we would have to have in coaching. What do you do in that situation? So yeah, it is a complicated. If it's just a group of friends that you're hanging out with and partying with,
well, people gave us
different.
People gave us a few different categories, and so maybe we can take a little bit of those, give a little bit of general advice. We always say like the coaching is for the much more specific cases, but we can kind of do some general stuff on the podcast, which is why we do it. And I think the friend circle one, like we can start with friends and like the circle of influence that you have there. I don't know who it was that talked about like you are essentially the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And when it comes to friendship circles, there is this thing about like you can't change yourself and the environment you're in simultaneously. That was a really good point. I think any way we can highlight that is really good. And I think that comes up in friend circles because a lot of times when people are changing, like we all know the person who they've been on a new diet for 2 weeks and now everyone knows about it and they're trying to make everyone vegan.
Yeah.
Right. And it may not actually be the best physiological solution for everyone, but we tend to like, everyone needs to now get into this thing that I'm in. And so if you've ever been on the inside of a group where one person kind of gets really into something and tries to get everyone involved, it's kind of a turnoff. And you feel like, I don't know if I belong with them so much anymore. And so there is almost this kind of like, I don't know how this works and this dynamic, works. So I think when it comes to friends, it's like, don't try and dump your growth on them. Don't try to force everyone to kind of keep up with you. But at the same time, and I'm so dedicated to friendships. I've had a lot of the friendships in my life, like my whole life. And I just had this experience with my oldest friend I've known since I was 5. Like, flew into town. We rode bikes together down to Cape Cod to do a triathlon. And like, I believe in preserving friendships. But at the same time, like, I want to be specific about the fact that friends are in your life for a reason. They're for a season, often for a purpose. But there will be times where you do have to seek out new relationships in order to grow. This happens with people who grow up in maybe a really poor community, and they're the one who like breaks out and they go to college and they get a really good job and they have this really whole stable thing. And there's this like tension between like, I am the place I come from, but I'm also this new community that I've formed. And there is a tension there, but you have to embrace the people who are actually helping you become the person you want to be and you're called to be, and not just the people who defined your past.
Yeah, well, and so not to drill down too deeply, I mean, this gets to the issue of identity, where we don't know the fullness of who we are. There's some who struggle, some types who struggle very much with their identity. But your identity is greater than what it is currently. Like you haven't reached the fullness of who you are. And so if we understand that as part of the journey, then it is about growth beyond where we are right now, which does involve, again, it means sometimes that certain relationships you're surrounded with will have to change. And our loyalty is not just to the amount of time we spend with a person. And sometimes we think of loyalty in those ways, like, well, loyalty means I'm spending the same amount of time that I've always spent with these people forever and ever. But then that's impossible, because what happens if you get married and you have a child? Well, then that has to change, right? And then are you being disloyal because now you're having a child that you're taking care of? Or you get a job that requires you to work and travel a bit more. So now you're traveling. Does that mean you're disloyal? Does that mean you don't take that job?
Right.
So it creates, so blind loyalty like that is not just the value that we should aspire to. I think it's understanding that there are relationships and just the dynamics of change in this world, in your work, or your career, your personal life will require shifts and changes. But it shouldn't be that it's from that place of judgment because, I just learned something 2 weeks ago. I'm on this new vegan diet, and now I'm judging everybody else who's not on it and trying to get you all to be on that diet with me. That's important to understand that. So I think just understanding that your journey will naturally take you places where it will require different investment of time and energy into people. And sometimes you have to recognize that I've had this conversation with people who were in a relationship with somebody whose negativity was so constant and their criticism of that person was just nonstop. They were always judging, criticizing. And that was really hard on them. And eventually they had to start moving away from that person because that constant level of toxicity was too much. And that's a healthy decision to make. Yeah. Like, it's not about rejection of you. It's about saying to you as a person who is doing this constant negativity, like, being truthful. Like, this level of criticism, could you pull back on that a little bit? Because this is too much for me. So it's not about just putting it all on them. It's recognizing, like, I can't handle that. Yeah. And if you can communicate that, then that person has the choice at that point whether they want to respond to that positively or negatively. Do they want to do something about it? And if they don't, then that's their decision to not honor you and to not respect you. That frees you. It's painful, but it frees you to make some decisions that you might need to make in order to, again, continue to take care of the garden of your own soul, which is your primary responsibility. And people forget that. They believe that their primary responsibility is other people. It's not. Your primary responsibility is you, your garden, your soul. And from the health of that, you're able to then contribute, give, and serve the world around you. That seems backwards to some people, but it actually is not. If you do that, you're giving from a place of wealth, of you having received first, and then you have something to contribute to the world. And I think that's important. So you have to judge. You have to discern your own life. Like, what's producing health in me, and is my environment conducive to that? I think it's a big question to constantly, regularly be asking ourselves.
Sometimes friendships that, they stay in our lives, but the role changes. The time with that person changes. Like, this person used to be maybe the closest person, but now, like, the context has changed. I'm in a different place. but I still love this person.
Yeah.
So I
Sure.
had that, just, a couple of years ago, and I was like, I don't know what to make of this relationship now because I'm in this totally different place. And this person has been really close, but like now we like don't live in the same place. And is it going to be weird seeing them? And I just thought, you know what? Like the times changes, but the only goal you need to have with this person during this time is just to enjoy them, just to have fun with them,
Yeah.
just to enjoy the space between you and not try and make it something that it used to be, not try and predict what it's going to be, like, but just be here in that space. And for some relationships, I feel like you do need almost like a vision or a mission over that. Like with this person, I'm going to, we're going to accomplish something together. With this person, I'm going to just enjoy them. With this person, we actually can help each other grow. With this person, we're going to be goofy and not worry about any of that.
Well, I had someone tell me this years ago. You need somebody that you're pouring your life into. You always need somebody that you're giving back to, right?
Yeah.
Then you need people that are right about where you are to journey with, because this is sort of, it's good. It's like back and forth. You're both encouraging each other. It's a good thing to have. And then you also need somebody that's further ahead than you are and who acts like a mentor and is pulling you forward, pulling you up. And I think that's a great way of thinking about relationships. And there are people that maybe don't fit directly into any one of those categories. Sure. You don't know how that, but that's sort of what you want, I think, in your immediate environment is to be thinking about, these are people I'm journeying with. These are people that are where I'm at. These are people that I'm pouring my life into, and these are people that are pouring their lives into me. And then again, even in your immediate environment, you'll have some who are in none of those, who do not want anything from you. They don't really want to journey where you are, and they're certainly not pouring their lives into you. So what do you do with those folks? Well, those folks, as you just described, you enjoy them. You enjoy what you can. I years ago, I had to make this decision with a family member. There was a family member that I really wanted. I recognized that what I wanted was something different in our connection and our interactions with one another. I stopped having I chose to stop having those expectations. It wasn't easy because I still had them. They still function at the emotional level. But at least I was able to say, well, I recognize that that's what I want. But if I want relationship with this person's probably never going to be able to do this for me. They're probably never going to be this way. So can I just enjoy them for who they are? And that changed everything. And how we interacted with one another is I was able to thoroughly enjoy what I had. And then whatever it is that I wanted or needed, I recognized was not going to come. And I was able to just sort of set that aside. And that has changed. And I mean it. It has changed for the last 10 years of my relationship with this family member. It has gone way better. And we have a great connection. And I know what I can't get from them. And that I get in other ways, through other relationships. Or if there are things that I just need to get from my own connection with myself. Sometimes I'm asking for people to do things for me that are really, it's not theirs to do for me. It's mine to do for me. For example, it is mine to choose a happy life, to choose joy, to choose to be full on the inside rather than coming empty and seeking life to give me that sort of buzz and that energy. That's been a shift. And so when thinking about relationships, it's thinking about what am I expecting from them, and then recognizing some people produce and can give certain things to you, and that's what you enjoy. Others can't, but can you still enjoy that? Can you still enjoy that connection? And I think that shifts a lot of things in terms of how we interact with people.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that when people are in our lives for a long period of time, like things happen, and you don't know if the person who is making fun of your growth now is going to go through something next year that forces them in a position where they have to be like, so I noticed you've really gone on this growth path the last couple of years, and I'm in this situation now. Like, can we talk about that? I think that's been one of the ones that surprised me. People who initially would be like, no, where you're at, the journey you're on, no, absolutely not. That's just wrong, or I don't get it, or I don't want any part of it. And then later come back around, they're like, oh, actually, like now that I'm in this position in life with this circumstance and this has happened to me, okay, I may need to listen.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking about is, I can't remember who said, one of the problems is we've drawn too small a circle around our family. and how we need to sort of draw a bigger circle. A lot of times we think like, well, I'm dedicated to these relationships, and if I expand into these other relationships, that's going to take away from this one. And it's actually like, no, it's not a either or. It's not like I need to abandon certain relationships and embrace new ones, but I can add to. And then it feels like, but it's going to take time away from here or this. And yeah, maybe sometimes you have to navigate that. But there's something about actually expanding the relationship and the network of relationships that you have in order to gain the gifts of so many of those people. Like, I actually would love to get to a point where I would be like, I absolutely have all 9 types in my relationship circle all the time that I'm close to because they all add these different gifts to me. And I think that's really a great gift is when you are surrounded by, more people. I know that I'm naturally disposed to that, being like a social subtype. Social instinct. I want, groups around me, and I tend to do that naturally. And for some people, that's more natural. And some people are like, well, I'm an introvert and I just don't go out and do those things. But you can still find community that will support your growth regardless where you are. And that does not mean necessarily the abandoning of current relationships that you really value.
Yeah. And I wish I could be more specific and practical in this. But again, this is really where coaching can take us to that level. And so at least for now, we can say, that's a good place to start thinking about things. Another point to this is to grow in your capacity to show grace to your circle. There are people in your circle who will feel toxic to you. So I want to say something that's a counterpoint to what I said earlier. Because again, with wisdom, there's always paradox. And so this is also a paradoxical statement. It's like some people think, I'm so into this thing of getting rid of people who are toxic in your life, And so then they blow up their relationships and they move away from that, right? The funny thing about it is they may be the toxic one. But to them, it's like, you're toxic. Right. And hey, I've done it. It's understanding that there are some people that are tough. They're difficult in your life. That doesn't mean that they're toxic. That doesn't mean that they're bad.
Yeah.
Again, this is different from like I'm trying to break away from my addiction to alcohol.
Right.
And I've constantly been partying with the same group of people for years.
Right.
That's different. That you have to do is a practical decision. But there are people that are in your life that it's not as clear, but they challenge you and it's difficult and you feel troubled by them and you might look at them and just say, I don't want, it's just easier not to be in a relationship with these people. I have found, and this goes to, by the way, this whole segment we could do on dating people have asked me, are there types that you should stay away from? So that's a very nuanced question because on one hand, yes, there are types that are easier. They get along easier. It seems that way anyways, right? So there's a lot of course, there's qualifiers there. It depends upon your health. It depends upon your instincts and so on. But there are people, there seems to be some pairings of types that we've noticed. And it is easier with certain pairings.
Yeah.
That does not mean that it's better. Easier does not mean better. Because some of my hardest relationships have also produced the greatest growth in my life and have been the most rewarding. I have a type 2 that was a friend of, initially, I wouldn't have considered a friend. But we started talking, we ran into some challenges relationally, and there were times where I thought, in the context that we were in, required us to be together quite a bit, work-wise, and I didn't really like it a lot of the time. It was frustrating. It would have been easier for me as a 7 to just say, well, 7s and 2s, it's just sometimes it doesn't work. It's a lot more difficult. But I recognize that this is not about toxicity. This is probably resistance. And resistance in this space reflects something internally in me that I need to work on. And so this is probably going to be really rewarding if I stay present to it. And I did. And it became very rewarding. And now I consider this person a friend, and they consider me a friend. Yeah. And I'm a better person for it. And I think they're a better person for it as well. So I think it's important to understand that got to be discerning about what is toxicity? What are you talking about then? If it's someone that's constantly judging you, putting you down, that's toxic.
Right.
If it's someone that you're constantly running into conflict with, that may not be toxic, because conflict is oftentimes a gift to reveal to us something that's going on internally, triggers internally that we can grow from. I think that's maybe a better way of thinking through that.
That's a bit on the friendship thing, but on this whole, what do you do when you're growing and the people around you aren't? This does come up in the dating question that you just mentioned, the dating question. And I think that's a really good thing, because especially when you realize that when you're dating as a pretty unhealthy person who isn't very emotionally aware or aware of their own issues, an unhealthy person tends to be attracted to someone who will enable them to be unhealthy. So once you move past that, if you are actually trying to get healthy and you have this concern that the person you're dating, they're not as dedicated to their own growth or their own path, like how do you approach that?
Oh, yeah. That comes up for us.
Yeah, we get that question a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For me, I've given them the word value, and to consider values more importantly than anything else, rather than, for example, types. Am I supposed to be with this type? This type can't commit. Am I supposed to be with this type? This type is, can't seem to do their own work. They know exactly what I need, but they don't know what they need. And, it's just, I get these questions, and yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But you know what? It's not so much type. I don't think it's type as much as it is values. Values matter so much. Are you both committed to the path of growth and transformation? Are you both committed to that? If you both are, that's a good thing.
Well, what about when one is and one isn't?
Yeah. So if one is not eager to grow and transform, you may have to consider, and I have to be careful how I say this, because there are some people that don't show growth in the same way. This is so important, because I've run into this where couples have said to me, I don't think he's interested in growth, or I don't think she's interested in growth nearly as much as I am. And then it's okay, but you're dealing with an introvert. You're dealing with somebody who's very private. They might be doing a lot of internal thinking and internal processing. They're not doing it with you externally. So you may want to check that out. And oftentimes they do. And sure enough, that person is actually thinking a whole lot about it, Yeah. I had this with my own wife. Like, I'm growing, honey. What's happening with you? We were getting into a little bit of a back and forth. And she surprised me with, I'm reading this book. I'm working really hard on it. I think about it all the time. It's just, these are the struggles that I have. Oh, right. Okay. So grace comes back into into that relationship. I think it's important for us to just ask the questions. What's going on with you? What do you value? What are you thinking about? And how are you growing? What are some thoughts you've been thinking about? You can ferret a lot of that out through questions as to, are they on the same path with you? And if they're not on the same path, if you understand that in fact they don't have the same value for growth and personal transformation, I have to say I don't know that it's going to work. I think you may have to consider this may be one of the moments where that aha starts to move you in a different direction, where you may have to let that dating relationship go. And it may take time for you to do so, but I think you may have to do that.
One of the main questions in dating someone is this person dedicated to their own growth? I think that is a really important question. But the wrong question is, are they doing it the same path as I am, in the same way? Do they verbalize it the same way I do? Do they externalize it as much as I do? Like, that isn't really fair to that person.
Right.
Because that's putting all these expectations on them. But at the same time, like, if you're really someone who is part of growing and that's an important part of your life, and you're dating someone who's just like, no, I just want to wake up in the morning, go to work, come home, make dinner, watch TV, go to bed. Yeah, like you said.
That's literally happened. I've had couples tell me.
Oh, totally.
That they asked they did actually ask the question, and the individual's like, no, I don't believe a leopard can change its spots. I think who you are is who you are, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my, you're going to be in for a very difficult relationship if that's the case.
But that person could have some kind of a traumatic experience or some kind of life circumstance that actually makes them have to look at that again. Like what I was saying earlier, you don't know that. But I say that one of the good things to look for in a dating relationship is someone who's just kind of like, here's examples of things that have evolved in my life where I recognize this pattern. I recognize this thing I used to do as a kid or this thing that my parents used to do. And this is how I changed that life stage. Like a desire to grow, if you are growing, it's one of those things where like once you've seen, you can't unsee. Like once you've seen that it's possible for people to grow and transform and change, it's really hard to be very intimately connected, the most intimate relationship with someone who isn't. Because that will not go away, and that's always going to perpetually grow. And it's going to be really hard to maintain intimacy with someone who does not have a value for something that is most inherently close to your heart.
And so there are some who will be more of the initiators and some responders. And I think that's true in a lot of relationships. There's one that will tend to be more of an initiator and one that will tend to be more of the responder. It's not always. I think of a couple right now that he is an initiator in one way and she's an initiator in a different way, right? So like in a different aspect of life. And so both of them are initiators in their own way, but not in the same areas. And so when they do relationship, they have to, that's very helpful to them, right? There will be some couples where one is more of an initiator in that space of personal growth. And if the partner is willing to journey with them, that's great. Like, you don't have to always be both initiating at the same pace and at the same level of energy for personal growth and transformation.
True.
So it's just awareness of like, is this person willing to change and grow? And if they follow my lead, that's great. I'll continue to be probably an initiator in that space. But that whole resistance, like a dogmatic resistance to growth and transformation versus one who is about growth and transformation, that will produce a problem. And what we're trying to say is, even in this whole space of dating, is like understanding that there are some challenges that are worth fighting, some problems that are worth accepting into your life, because everybody's got problems. You're going to date or you're going to live with somebody who's got a set of problems. You're not going to ever date people without. So what do? Is you just sort of have to figure out which set of problems am I willing to deal with and which ones am I not. Yeah. And I think if you have a value for growth and transformation, the other person does not at all, and there's no response to your initiating, you definitely have a big problem. And I think at that point you may want to choose a different path.
There's a book by Eli Finkel called The All or Nothing Marriage, and he gives a history as far as what relationships were primarily about through the different phases of American history. And he talks about how at the very base level, it was about survival. You needed the partner in order to make the family structure work financially. It's just for survival-based marriage. If you have two people living on the farm, then you need hands to make this. You need one person working in the field while someone else takes the goods to market. And it's just really about survival. And then you have this thing that happens when there's more affluence after the Industrial Revolution, where it moved from the survival-based marriage to the love-based marriage, because now I actually get to pick who I'm with. And I can choose someone that I like to be with and that I have sort of feelings for. That became a lot more important than it had in previous generations, having these strong feelings for this person. And that sort of went on through, the 50s, and then in the 60s with the sexual revolution, things started kind of changing. And he parallels this with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So at a very base level, you need to survive, you need food and shelter. And that's what marriage was about, therefore. But then as you move up and you have those needs met, then you have like love and belonging. And then the marriage sort of becomes about that. But over the last couple decades, especially as people have become not just more affluent, but they have more time, they have more connection, they have all this stuff. It's really moved up into that self-actualization. Yeah. And I want to know myself and I want to grow. And one of the biggest things is I want a partner who's helping me grow into the person I want to be. And so then now they have the self-actualization based marriage. Is he saying that's sort of where the things are? He's like, but the problem with Maslow's hierarchy of needs is you get higher up this mountain, this Mount Maslow. At the top, it has a great view, and the marriages that can get there are some of the best marriages. He thinks the best marriages that have ever been, but it's fewer and fewer people that can kind of get to that height. And so it's really hard to get to that kind of marriage. If you have that kind, it's amazing. If you can meet a person where you have that kind of relationship, I mean, yeah, you could have one of the greatest relationships of all time, but it's really hard to get there. And it's really hard to live that high up on the mountain. You got to bring your own oxygen. He uses all these different images around. And there's actually more of a separation between kind of the relationally rich and poor, where there's higher and lower. So there's some people who have like the greatest relationship, and then so many other people who are just like, it's just not working. And we're trying to hear, and we see that that's possible, but man, that's really hard. And even a lot of literature is just kind of like where he uses several examples of modern books where people were in relationships and they kind of broke out of those relationships because they weren't helping them grow. And you have to understand, I think, with this question around dating, what if I'm growing and I really want to pursue a lifestyle of transformation and growth and self-actualization, but I'm with someone who doesn't? There's a cultural narrative that marriage is moving into a place where the expectation is that we're with someone who grows. And so being with someone who doesn't, you are in a battle that you're probably not going to win. It's very, very difficult because there are so many voices around. I mean, it's just like probably people who are like falling in love, and you have all these stories that you really start seeing these stories emerge all over the world in the 1800s of like, yes, this person's from a good family, but I'm really in love with this person over here.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a huge luxury. And to the generation before, that sounded so absurd. But now it's in this opposite thing. So it's like, no, people are going to want a relationship where this person actually helps me grow and move into self-actualization. And if that's not present, it's going to be very hard to sustain the relationship, because that is one of those cultural narratives that it can't go away. Once you know you can have feelings for someone in a marriage, it's really hard to go back to a survival-based marriage, or we are only here just to meet bills and whatever. And now it's moving into this new evolution, or basically a higher consciousness of relationship. It's really hard to like go, oh, I can just settle for, this thing back here.
Yeah.
But if two people are pursuing that together, you can have a really powerful kind of a thing.
Yeah. I see it. Because I've glimpsed at it, in my relationship with my wife, and that is where, we both know that's where we want to go. We want to continue to move towards that direction. And when we say marriage, by the way, we mean, partnerships as well, relationships, any kind of relationship at all that has you spending a whole lot of time with one another.
We're not talking about government-sanctioned paperwork version,
right,
but like
exactly.
functional partnering with another human being.
Yeah. It's any partnership that requires lots of time spent together is that you're going to need to think about things like this.
Right.
That are your values closer and more lined up with each other than not? Because this goes into more than dating. This goes in marriage and partnerships. This goes into also things related to work. I have, one client that asked me about work. How do I deal with a work environment where I feel like I'm growing and transforming, but others around me are not? And that environment that I spend a whole lot of time in is not always conducive to my own growth.
Totally.
Right? Great question. One that, to some degree, if you've got the ability to influence that space, wonderful. If you don't, that's a difficult one. You may have to consider that your growth is that important, for you. And if you have the capacity financially to look for something else, to move somewhere else, then that might be one of the things you do decide to do, because your growth matters that much to you, and that makes a lot of sense. If you can change the environment even a little bit, that's great. There are things you can do to change that space, but that depends on a lot of factors. There's some factors where you don't have the influence, you don't have the role, you don't have the ability to do that. So that may not be the place. That may not be the place where you end up spending the rest of your life at, or nobody spends the rest of their lives anywhere anymore.
Right.
But you may want to cut that shorter. And as you think about what you want to do for work, that should be at one of the requirements, right? For you is to think about, is this environment, it's just not about money, it's not just about this, is this environment, and that's what people are asking today, is this environment helpful to me? Does it, is it an environment that I'd want to work at? So it's funny how even in terms of career and the whole job world, I mean, it seems like everybody's thinking about that. The companies are thinking about the work environment. What's the culture like, you know? So those are things that people are asking a lot these days.
And going through the process of growth and transformation will give you more emotional intelligence, which will, in effect, change the type of work you do and the way that you approach your work. And it will probably also change the type of roles that you are able to hold.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. You know, I think emotional intelligence is a big thing. Social awareness, huge. These are things that I talk a lot about, is how to tune into what's happening within you. Because if you can, at least as you change, you're going to notice that there's things that you can tolerate that you couldn't tolerate before. There are other things that you'll notice that you tolerated before that you can't tolerate anymore. You know, it's a strange thing how all that works, but you'll be in an environment where you're working, and before then you couldn't tolerate the interactions you were having with certain people at work. As you became more self-aware, you realize these are things within me. It's not my environment. I need to grow. So you grow, and then that stops being a significant problem. Other awarenesses are like, wow, I didn't notice how toxic this was. Didn't even notice it when I first came in. But because I'm aware of how important it is for me to continue to grow, I'm realizing that I'm surrounded by a bunch of people that are not interested at all and are constantly negative, and that's affecting me. And work world is now so involved. I mean, we spend so many hours there. That it does matter. But yeah, social awareness, emotional intelligence, those things are huge components to continuing your own growth and you know, to helping the work environment be a different place, a better place.
Yeah, and people in healthier work environments with less negativity and in relationships with less negativity live longer. It's just, these are the components that they have a physiological effect on you as well. It's not just an emotional, it's not just a supportive effect, but they actually have a physical effect on the structures of your heart, of your mind, of your neural connections, of even how your metabolism processes. There's a ton in that as far as like that actually impacts every aspect of your life. So it's not just a simple question. And I hope that there's things that have stuck out about this conversation, about this question around what to do when you want to grow and the people around you don't, that were helpful. But it's not a simple question, and there's not a sort of really simple, clear answer we can give you. Like, obviously, we could get a lot more specific in coaching, but as far as answering that question, that's a really, really hard question. And a lot more people are having to navigate that question as there's an increasing number of people who are interested in personal development, in their own growth. And they're constantly running into environments where they're going, now what?
Yeah.
Now
because because it's a both and question. The question has to do with, you know, is it me? Is it them? It's both and, you know, and you really don't know until you start to do the path and the journey, and then it starts to reveal to you, oh, right, so this is more me. I need to work on this. Oh, I get it. That's them, and that's their need, and that's their issue, and so can I show grace, and can I be gracious to these people and create a more loving environment, at least in my bubble, in the atmosphere that I create.
Totally.
This is where you and I have talked about this before, the difference between being a thermometer and a thermostat.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you start doing your own work, you stop being just a thermometer. And I think both are important. You need to be able to read the atmosphere of around you. You need to have some adaptability, and that's the you know, the metaphor of the thermostat. You know, the thermometer. You're reading the temperature, and you can adapt. You have some adaptability to it, but so many of us feel like we're victims in the space we're in. We're just reading the environment. We're reacting to it, right? There's also the ability for us to create an atmosphere immediately around us, within us, and immediately around us that is more driven by us than by just the environment around us. And that's when we, become more of a thermostat, creating an environment, creating an atmosphere that that is loving, that is gracious, that is peaceful, and that I think is helpful in an environment. And you can do that. You can do at least that part.
I think this is a good conversation to have. It's a good question to have. But ultimately, here's what it comes down to: is if you stay on the path, if you stay on the process of your transformation, these questions are going to get answered for you.
Yes.
It's not like I'm going to have to make all of these decisions. Yes, you'll have to make some of them, but really the path is going to create itself if you stay on it.
It always does.
Yeah, that I can tell you. That I can guarantee you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Oh, yeah. It's not like, we don't have any answers and therefore there are no answers. No. This is why in coaching, it starts to become real and the path becomes vivid to people. I seldom have a coaching session. I don't know about you, Jim, but I seldom have a coaching session where there isn't clarity that emerges from that. Yeah. Oh, right. That's the
next step. Yeah.
A clear next step. Not a clear 10 steps, but a clear next step.
Right.
But that's the path. It only shows you what's next and not all the way down the road that you can anticipate. And, but it's faithful. It's very faithful.
Yep. Walk the path and it will be clear.
Yeah.
That's good. So thank you so much for listening. And as we've been saying, we appreciate your interest in our work, but we are even more appreciative that you are doing your work to make your world a better place. So thanks for tuning in. You know how to reach us. So have a great week.